Hi, I'm Thom Ernst, and you're watching Making Movies the Canadian Way. And when I'm not watching film, some of the things I'd love to do, or one of the things I'd love to do, is reading about film. And I particularly like reading film critics' reviews, or synopses, or analytical points of the film. Sometimes they help me get a new perspective on the movie, sometimes they change my opinion, and sometimes they anger me. But a good review doesn't have to be one that I necessarily agree with. Just has to be a review that gets me thinking, gets me talking, and maybe even gets me into the movie. Let's start off. Right across from me, Jeff Revere, freelance writer now, used to be with the Globe and Mail. And next to Jeff, we have Norm Wilner from Now Magazine. Thank you, Norm, for coming in.
Pleasure.
Now from the Globe and Mail, Natalie Atkinson.
Hello.
And right next to me is Arad Simon Pila. Simon Pila?
Simon Pillay.
Yes, there we go. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
I do like reading film reviews, and I like reading them if I've seen the movie, if I don't plan on seeing the movie. It's just an enjoyable read for me. To me, it's not so much about whether the movie's good or not, but it's kind of an insight to the film. I just wonder, I'll start with you, Jeff, if that's how you approach your reviews or your critiques.
Whether or not people will like reading them?
Well, that would be one way to approach it, I would imagine.
That's pretty high up.
Yeah.
That's actually pretty high up. I mean, I don't, I probably read less criticism now than ever. Mostly because I see such a small percentage of films that are new. So if I see something, it looks interesting, either after I've seen it or before I've seen it, I will look up and try to find something interesting that's been said about it. But I do not have what I would call a promiscuous relationship with reading movie reviews. No, it's actually very specifically geared to something I'm interested in, and then to try and find some interesting commentary on it. That's enough work as I'm prepared to do right now as far as movie criticism, looking for it is concerned.
Okay, I think that's it. Norm, I think that's an interesting point what Jeff brings up. Do we look at reading film reviews or researching film reviews from the perspective of what the movie is, what movie is being talked about, or are we drawn to who's writing about it? So
That's a good question. I don't know. I'm kind of in the same boat. I won't read a review until I've seen the film myself, because if I have to write about it, I don't want anybody else's phrases rattling around in my head. I don't want to prejudice myself necessarily towards good or bad either. I'd rather see a film as blind as possible, and then in that case, whoever reads it would probably be reading it because of the film, not because of me. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I would love to believe that I have a following.
Oh, I think if you
seek me out, but realistically, I don't think so. I think people at this point, I think criticism exists as much more of a broad spectrum analysis device, and we're individual nodes that people can look to. And yeah, you can compare yourself against a given writer and think he hates what I love, therefore if he hated this, I'll like that, or even if he likes something, we have the same taste. But I don't think there is a position of primacy anymore, the way that there was in the days of Ebert or Cale or anybody else who might have once had that level. Like Jonathan Rosenbaum, somebody I'm always going to look for, but I don't know that anybody new, anybody since Rosenbaum or maybe Ebert has amassed that level of following. Certainly I can't say I have that kind of readership.
I think it depends, though, on the different contexts for the film reviews, because there's, what people consider almost like a Consumer Reports of film review, which is your sort of more really mainstream print media, which is on a specific day. Newspaper is always Friday because it's sort of published against release day, which is also the day that all the advertising happens, which is the same reason a Wednesday is when all the food stuff is, because that's when they used to have grocery store flyers. So, there's all these different days for the newspaper. So if it's in the newspaper, you tend to think it's a subscriber opening the paper, or now the weekly.
Sure.
Whereas I think the stuff that just sort of happened, that someone's ready to write about a certain film and it appears on a Tuesday 2 months before the film comes out, is a different kind of criticism. And then it's perhaps less, or it's maybe more fulsome, or something that comes out 6 months or 2 years later is a different kind of thing. There's that thumbs up, thumbs down sort of dichotomy, right? Like, do I see it or not? That's the Friday reader. Do I go see this movie or not?
Yeah, my superpower may be feeling the movie back at the reader, but I think they really only want to. So often, even when I was back at the Star, they would just stop at the star rating and say, "Oh yeah, he liked it or he didn't like it." It's not about the analysis at this point.
Oh, that's interesting. So, but then that's when film criticism becomes a consumer thing, whether we go spend our money or not. But my understanding when you do film criticism is to sort of get away from that. You're to actually offer something more than just see this movie and not see this movie. Brad, your situation is a little bit different. You do write for the Now, but a lot of the things you do is on television.
Right.
And television has constraints.
Yeah.
When it comes to film criticism that I certainly wasn't able to deal with. And that is being short and concise and to
Short
the
and
point.
concise, and you can't really deep dive on a movie in the minute or so that you have on every movie, right? And
Yeah.
it's, I mean, you just totally lose viewers and stuff. So it's like, I mean, that's why I am glad I also get to write and do the television side, because the television side is a lot of fun and you do engage viewers. But then the writing side, you do when a movie gets you passionate enough to deep dive on it. That's my opportunity, right? But I mean, in terms of reading reviews and stuff, like, I mean, I like them. I don't read a review until I've actually written down my review, because I have seen other people's words in the past get into my reviews. So I definitely keep that in mind. But then I do have those critics who I do follow up on. Like my favorite writers who I want to know, like after I had written my review, I do want to compare notes with them, because maybe there is something that they'll change the way I looked at this movie, and that happens all the time. Like, there's that first viewing never lasts.
That happened infamously with you, Jeff. Where you actually wrote an article about it, about changing a point of view of a film. I don't remember what the film was.
Superman Returns.
No, it was Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes.
Yes, that's right. And you
See?
had talked about
Go
the
on.
junction.
Yeah. Did you catch the silence there when that was mentioned? It's like, oh no,
I
you
just-
got to
So
talk
which way
about
did
that.
you go?
Yeah, where did you start from?
I was sent on a junket for that film, and it was one of those cases where I just really sort of hit it off with the filmmaker. We were talking about the old Planet of the Apes and what it meant to us, and the next thing you know, I walked away with a positive review for the film. Now, what happened in the interim will probably tell us a lot about the fallibility of film criticism. However, I saw the film a week later. I took my daughter, who was then I think about 11 or 12 years old, and I remember her tugging about 15 minutes into it. She said, "Dad, this really sucks." And I'm going, "Yeah, it did really, yeah." And so I actually wrote a column then saying that I was wrong, describing the circumstances. I hopefully turned the piece into just kind of an object lesson in why proximity to people involved in making films is not exactly the best way to be a movie critic. And it was actually written about and picked up in a number of different newspapers. There was an editorial written about it in the Washington Post. But then a couple of planes flew into the towers in New York, and my international incident was quickly eclipsed by more important things.
Yes. But for that short period, it became quite the discussion.
It was an odd discussion, yeah, because you weren't supposed to change your opinion. You're supposed to basically, it was expected that once you cast that opinion, it was like a branding. Right, that was it, and you stuck with it forever. And actually, I would say that's actually sort of never been my approach. My interest has always been in what I think is the particular dynamics of your response at the time, right? And so, which is another reason why I've always been terrible at letting people know what they should see or not see, because I have no idea.
Does the rating system give you pause? Because the sort of writing the review is generally, for me, easy, but just the less soul-searching part, and then knowing that at the end of it, I still have to give the editor, to go with that, a number or or a half. I really find that difficult, and in this age where everything is a number, everything's aggregated, and we can now quantify things, and so that's all we do. I mean, with Rotten Tomatoes and Metacritic and IMDb's having issues with that, do you find that oppressive?
I scratch my head over that the most, because it's like you're figuring out, I gave this movie a 3. I can't necessarily give this movie a 3, but then it's like, but then I don't want to go jumping or giving it a 4, because it's not that, that frustrates me the most, because it's not a mathematical, it's not science, there's a lot of thoughts that go into it. So no, that is definitely the thing that I think from the time that I've seen the movie to the time that I wrote the last line in the review, I'm the whole time I'm like, where is this going to fall on that little spectrum?
And we have People magazine to blame for that.
Oh, is it People?
Did they
Was it
start the
People
rating
that started
system?
that?
People's Picks and Pans was the first sort of mainstream publication to use ratings and numbers. And after that, there was no turning back. And when you explain to people today that actually for decades, movie reviews, you had to make the investment of what 3 or
Right.
4 minutes to read the review. They go, unbelievable. Why would anybody do that? But the question is that you're implying now is great. It's like, why bother reading the review if what you're looking for is basically that restaurant rating?
Yeah. And when you're talking about reading reviews before you write the review and you wouldn't do it, you would avoid it. But as a consumer or as someone who enjoys reading reviews, and I'm one of the only people in the world that does not mind spoilers. I mean,
Right? Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't mind them either, actually.
because you hate spoilers.
I won't watch trailers. I don't want to know anything.
Yeah,
I don't either. I don't either.
understand
Yeah.
that.
I want
can
the movie to
understand that.
tell me what it wants to tell me when it's time.
But there's
I-
anticipation too, is there not?
We're in this cult of anticipation
Yeah,
now,
we
where
live that way
there are,
all the time.
you know, in every field, it's who's going to be in the ad campaign 6 months from now. That's a news item because everyone's spinning this endless metabolism of minute by minute daily news now on the internet, and so they need something to fill it. So everything's a news story, including. I mean, I've done interviews that were embargoed with the director when the trailer launches, which I find the height of absurdity.
Yeah.
I'm interviewing you about the trailer that I haven't even seen, or I've seen under very strict conditions at the office of the distributor under code of silence.
And
It's a
then-
trailer.
And then websites will do the shot-by-shot breakdown of the trailer, which they pulled from YouTube. And
What we
does
learned from.
Does this hat mean that there's a Sith standing behind? No, there's a shadow. It's just a shadow. But it's insanity. It's unnecessary. I know there's a new Star Wars movie coming out. I don't need to see a trailer which will tell me which characters are in it because I want to find out who's in it when the movie plays. That's the most basic level of storytelling, is that you should want to be surprised. And
I'll tell
I
you
understand
something.
if you're...
My feeling about that is if the enjoyment of a movie is ruined by knowing something that happens in the plot, it's probably not a very good movie. Yeah, that's the way I feel about it. I know, really. It's like, you see, I start a movie, and I know that this is the person who is going to be run over by a car at the end. I'm okay with that. Not them being run over by a car, but I'm okay with that because I'm totally interested in the journey that gets me there. It's just, I'm not, but I have to be, have had the crap kicked out of me by readers and listeners for years because I realize I'm just kind of like stupidly indifferent to that because that's not why most people see movies. They go because they want to see a narrative unfold. And so when you're telling them something like that, you are in fact messing with that. But my own personal feeling is that I don't worry about that kind of stuff because that's usually not what, to me, an interesting film is about, not what happens in it.
Interesting enough, I would agree about the trailers, and not that I'm here to contradict anything you say, but I agree about the trailers. There's something about visually seeing it that can be a turn off. But hearing about it is different because, and I think it stems from being a 12-year-old who hears about this guy gets run over at a certain point, and you go, I gotta see that. Or that scanner, somebody's head explodes. I gotta see that.
I waited years to see The Wild Bunch because I couldn't wait to see everybody get killed because it sounded so amazing.
Yeah.
Bonnie and Clyde too.
But these are good examples. Bonnie and Clyde, etc. Their endings are really significant to what the whole film is. Certainly, there are movies that you have to review where the ending is a game changer as to whether the film is good or not.
Yeah.
And how do you, if you can't give away the ending, how do you handle that?
You can talk about a film's importance in a million different ways without discussing its specific plot mechanics. My personal rule is, it used to be back when film was shown on reels, if it happened after the first reel, 20 minutes in, I wouldn't talk about it. And that can be really difficult. But, if the job is hard every now and then, that's actually a good thing.
Yeah.
And you can tap dance, you can conceal, you can obfuscate, you can flat out mislead if it's necessary to protect something. But you can do it in such a way that's metaphorical rather than actually lying to the reader. I don't know. It's never been a
plot
problem.
synopsis doesn't. I mean,
don't
that's the
wanna
thing.
do it.
Like, I don't think reviews should be plot synopses.
Yeah.
They should just be a response. I mean, in fact, that you could go off talking about something else outside of the film itself, and that could still be applied to your review because this movie made you think of this. So I think relying on plot synopsis in a review is a sign of a weak review.
And why I find television so hard, because they almost demand that.
Right, yeah. I mean, I have a good situation there where it's like 3 lines of plot synopsis and then we just banter. But yet, I do get the like trying to talk about. I mean, I hate that part where you have to like go over the plot of a movie on camera, like just talking about it. It's like
the elevator pitch.
Yeah.
And it's so you can set up the clip, right? Every time it's so you can understand what's happening in this 2 seconds of movie from 45 minutes into the film that you're, because we used to have that when I was on Global talking about video releases for entertainment desks. It's like, well, we could lay out Schindler's List, but that's a little long. We could just, you know what it's about.
But there are a lot of plot-heavy films, though. I mean, that's. I mean, a lot of the mainstream. We know the Avengers are probably all going to survive at the end, and if plot were such a problem, spoilers, then all the biopics that continually win all these awards and get the acclaim, and we know how these all end. There's the case of, I think it's The Witness for the Prosecution, which was the first instance of please do not spoil. The end card was please do not reveal this twist ending in the 50s.
Psycho?
Yeah, a couple of years.
Several years, and that was the first time.
Too.
And yes,
Yeah.
So, but at this point, that's what gets sort of, there's a twist. You kind of, what's the thundercloud?
Well, every time we watch a Star Wars movie now, they're giving us warnings at the press screenings, right? Like somebody goes on stage now and tells us not to reveal this, that.
But the way they do it is so beautiful, which is we want to preserve the surprise for everyone in the Star Wars family. You're not going to go against the family. Like they're just acknowledging that it's a cult.
Oh my Lord!
It is a cult.
Yeah, we don't want people in Sith costumes showing up with hammers at your Don't talk about what happens to Jar Jar.
As if surprises have anything to do with Star Wars.
Well, there was
That's the thing. How many people actually? I mean, I'm thinking of people my age. We all saw the original Star Wars, knowing what we know about the end of Empire Strikes Back. I'm being careful because I'm afraid of these cameras.
I know. Let's talk about the crying game.
Yeah, but it's like you still managed to love it, even though you knew that big dark secret, because the movie strengths are not just that surprise.
Sure,
So,
that's why it's rewatchable.
Exactly.
You can enjoy it again.
That's absolutely the point, and I think you brought it up too, Natalie. So many films are being made out of novels, bestsellers, and if spoilers were an issue.
Girl on the Train.
Yeah.
I mean, not that that was a particularly great film.
It wasn't, but
But more people saw that movie in the opening weekend than read the book. I mean, it's just a question of scale. Film attracts a larger audience, so you're still going to get people who, even with Stephen King's novels, I mean, there's a Dark Tower adaptation that millions of people are excited about, and there are millions more who've never heard of it.
These visions, as you call them.
What do you see?
I see a tower, the man in black, and the gunslinger.
They're just dreams. They're not real, Jake.
So you can never really win that way. Jackie Kennedy, you tell people what's happening in this window of time, pretty sure they're going to understand what's going on. On the other hand, that did happen 50-odd years ago, and people may not know. Like, people may actually not know. People are phenomenally ignorant.
But they also won't see that movie, so
That's
they don't care.
They won't see that movie. Or they'll see Parkland, which is a different...
Natalie, you said you find writing reviews quite easy, and you almost seemed embarrassed by it. You kind of went, I find it easy. I don't find it easy. I find it very hard. So how do you go about it? Do you find a thread? Do you find a theme?
Because I write film reviews and I do other things too, so I only review the films either that are what I call the sort of leftovers. So the lead critics take their pick, and sometimes I like reviewing the films that got left behind, because you're the underdog, and you know that's not the one that every eye is going to be on. I usually just find an angle, something that speaks to me, and I used to try to be, how does one do this? And I have to, look at all the greats, and it wasn't my writing that was coming out of that. It was trying to figure out what the formula was, and there isn't a formula.
Right.
In a newspaper, though, you're looking at 7 to maybe, if you're lucky, 900 words, which is not very long to talk about a film in every. Oh, I'm sorry. Sharp, take a breath on either side. And so, I usually find a thread. Now, that said, in the few times when I've written more of an essay format in the mainstream, what they call heritage press or something, we're called old school, and I haven't come out definitively, and I've tried to be more nuanced about the film and in an analytical way, like I'm thinking of the Sherlock Ian McKellen film. We had many readers write in and say, but she didn't say whether it was good or not, or whether she liked it. So, you can't really win.
And really, I mean, can a critic decide, take a small film and champion it, and it result in more people going to the movie? Or is that era sort of...
I think we all like to believe we can.
Yeah, well, I think depending on the movie, I mean, like, especially say like when you review a movie at TIFF and you're the first champion of it, it begins a little avalanche. It gets the attention of other marketers and distributors. That's what they use to start the machine. That one small review started that. and then the marketing machine picks it up. So I think depending on the movie, I mean, certainly it doesn't matter when it comes to Star Wars. But,
No.
like, you know,
I'd like to think it's the way in which there can be an effect, and it's cumulative, is from the medium to smaller films that might not get seen.
Yeah, and that's what I'm thinking of with Patterson's and things like that. I mean, you've probably been writing longer than anybody else here. I remember actually, you started like 19, I think, when I first met you at
the year 1932.
No, 1932.
Or was it my age you were referring to?
Yeah, you were 19 at the time
Yeah.
and started. So there was more of an opportunity, I think, back then to champion smaller films, and more. It seemed like to me more of an influence that the critics had on an audience.
Well, I think that the also, everybody here, I think, will know what I'm talking about. But also, exhibition was so different at that point in time, right? It was actually possible, for example, even just in a city like Toronto, where in many cases a number of the smaller films that might open would only be opening here. Right, would only be opening here at that time. So you were writing actually for a very particular and targeted audience, and you could, in that case, I think, sort of make a difference. I think that the other thing is it's difficult to champion those sort of what I call sort of out of mainstream movies if you are working for some place that doesn't really care about out of mainstream movies, which increasingly the situation at the Toronto Star where I worked, which was like basically the thing that I was originally doing for them, which they seemed to like, was suddenly, after a number of different shifts in editorial policy and priority, was suddenly not something that they were interested in anymore. The interest was in primarily the big movies that opened that week and the celebrity interviews that would go along with it. So in that case, it's the other films increasingly kind of marginalized, moved to the back of the section and not talked about. But I think that in I can't remember at what point I gave up the idea of writing to try and influence people's movie-going habits. Occasionally you get excited and you want to share that, but for the most part, I also think that gets in the way of me just kind of like writing honestly about what I'm seeing.
Mm-hmm. I think, it was an eye-opener for me when I found out that filmmakers rely on our reviews to get their next new movie made, like in terms of really independent filmmakers. So in a way, like, I think now I approach movies as possibly last will and testament of this filmmaker. Yeah. It's like, and of course that's not gonna prop them up for that reason, but this is like, you take more care into knowing that this is something that they would have to show on their resume.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. You say you wouldn't prop them up for that reason, but at the same time, would you look at a new filmmaker and understand? I mean, you'd have to sort of readjust your thinking or readjust your perception of a film if it's a young, new filmmaker and you could see the potential that's maybe not in this particular film? Or the
empathy factor.
Thank you for that.
Which
yes, that's what I'm looking for.
Which tends to be people made this film, and they can be more faceless and making many millions of dollars on back end points and things when you're talking about the Guardians of the Galaxy or something. But when it's something sort of smaller or made with more care, not that you're more forgiving, but I think there's a burden of empathy that is maybe less present when you're, deciding to do 1 out of 5 star or 4 stars for a Star Wars movie or something. Mm-hmm. Would you agree?
I don't know. Crap is crap. Like, if there's a bad movie, you can't be nice to it because the filmmaker might want to make another movie.
But you want to make constructive criticism, which is not what criticism is.
Constructive criticism might be trying to block that career
from happening.
That could be constructive.
Come
positive.
to my house,
You're talking about a
I'll
positive role
quick.
For a critic. That's it right there.
Okay.
Discouraging more crap.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, John Harkness told the story of a filmmaker coming up to him at Cannes once and saying, you should be nicer when you review films. You can end careers. And he just looked back and said, apparently not.
Yeah, exactly.
My favorite story.
I wish.
Oh, I have a John Harkness story I like to tell. Jeff, you were there at the time. I don't remember, but it was at Harbourfront at the film series. And a filmmaker actually came down because she knew that Harkness was going to be at the screening and went up to him and said, "You gave my film a bad review and you walked out before it was over." And Harkness didn't even look at her and said, "I don't need to drink the whole glass to know the milk is sour." And I thought that was great. Oh, you don't like that?
No, the problem is that I think the sort of the middle is in so many ways disappearing. And again, I find actually there's so much criticism and there's so much competition for attention that a sort of a takedown or highlighting something out of proportion in a film or dwelling on something is a way to get clicks now. And I really feel that keenly. And I just wonder how some critics are being disingenuous with the way they review a film to make their bones, as it were, out in the marketplace. Because we are in a marketplace of criticism.
And we have a lot of critics who are just excited to see their name on the poster with a quote. So they, like every movie is absolutely amazing, and I don't remember. I can't.
How does that happen?
They come to you at junkets, especially, and they say, "Do you want to pick one of these quotes?"
Yep. No.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I did a review of a smaller
and they're not really
film.
critics. Sorry, go ahead.
No, of a smaller film where I got one of the large, let's just say the House of Mouse studio, called and said, "We'd love to use a quote from your review." And I was this is great. We were wondering if we could shorten it to, and it was, I think it was that Chris Pratt film that he made, and it was Chris Pratt, and then there was a long sort of, nuanced sentence with a middle and stuff. It was like, "is wonderful." Like ellipses is wonderful. That's not even saying anything.
Yeah.
But I mean, I like it better when they quote your reviews as opposed to this junket thing where they just ask you to pick a slogan
Pick a word.
and
for
put
the
your
most
name
part,
behind it.
You're right. Those aren't critics. Those are entertainment reporters.
Exactly.
Who end up on the poster.
Exactly. And then they're the ones they say critics are raving about this movie.
Yeah.
No.
I sometimes wonder, and what worries me is maybe readers know and they don't care, or the audience. Like, it could be podcast, it could be television. The difference between the junketeers they're just there for being entertainment reporters, and the people who have no fiduciary or there's no burden of their career if they lose access to going to Skywalker Ranch. Does the audience who's reading or listening to your criticism know the difference?
Well,
I wonder.
The people outside of film that I meet take their advice from IMDb ratings.
Right.
So, I mean, that's not even critics. That's just people, right? So it's like, I mean, I don't know how many people really can distinguish what a critic is or what even a critic. I mean, I've met people who thought I review movies based on trailers. They didn't know I actually saw the movie before I wrote about it.
Wow.
I was like, wow, you definitely didn't read anything I ever wrote.
Yeah.
And this is family.
Oh yes, that happens.
Yeah.
Burst a blood vessel.
It's like,
it's. I don't know what currency we still have as an entity, as an industry. I know that I'm trained for nothing else, so this is the thing. This is what I do, and hopefully I'm competent enough at it that it still distinguishes itself from that sort of clickbait planning and stuff. And we know that when we see it.
Mm-hmm.
You can also tell when somebody has cared about what they've written, and I think that applies to criticism or anything else. And you can see it in a filmmaker too. Nobody sets out to make a bad movie, but a lot of people set out to make competent movies that will make money, and we should be a bulletproof vest against that for people. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's still their $16 at the end of the day.
Yeah, but you don't want to be a consumer guide. You don't want to be.
No, but you should be able to say, don't bother with this. You can go see this.
Yeah.
Free Fire and The Lost City of Zed opened on the same day. That was tricky. They're both great, but fortunately, 3 other films opened that were not as good, and that was a really easy call. It's like, nope, those 2. Fight for those. They're very good.
But again, I mean, I think we're getting back to, are we really there to guide people, or are we there for that to engage them in a conversation after they've seen whatever movie, and then they could, engage with the writing and
But you've read
engage with
the
the
comments
ideas,
that follow
right?
your stuff. That's not a conversation.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
But see, like when you think of what's happened in television criticism, to sort of slightly diverge here, but television isn't. You have a few critics at different institutions who prescribe what to see. But then largely what television criticism has become is the criticism that is the recap criticism, which is everyone on a Monday, the spike of things like any Sunday night TV show, the spike in any kind of search, all the Twitter and everyone else will tell you is on the Monday when everyone's seen it. And they want to be part of this conversation. And I think film is slowly getting to that again, whereas it's not, go see this, don't go see this. It's, we've seen this, let's have a conversation, which is why the tail on something like La La Land is 6 weeks long, right?
Yeah, but is it a conversation, or is it just people seeking validation? That, I read this recap and it feels the same way I feel, so I feel good about my opinion, which is what Rotten Tomatoes encourages, which is what the IMDb encourages, distillation of opinion to yes or no. And there is no middle ground because it's binary, because there's only yes or no.
Okay, so we're talking about the conversation of film, and as critics, sometimes that conversation can get really out of hand with filmgoers. And that could happen if you're at a cottage, it could happen if you're on vacation. So how do you sort of curb that conversation of film, just saying, I'm not I'm not working today. When someone comes up to you and says, the best movie I've ever seen is Raiders of the Lost Ark. Isn't it the best movie you've ever seen? You have to go, well, no. And don't you think this other movie?
It's
a
actually,
great movie.
It's pretty great.
It's not the best movie I've ever seen.
But I can have that
Are we
conversation.
going to have this
with
fight
them.
now?
No, what I'm saying is I can listen to you tell me why it is, and I can still have my own opinion. And I can indulge you in that opinion.
Yes, you can. But if you're at the cottage and you tell someone that their film that they love is not necessarily the best film, or that this other movie, History of Violence, is so overrated, and you don't think it's overrated.
Now he wants to fight.
Exactly.
Coffee. I'm sorry, we're closed. Oh, I know that. I do know that. Shut up! We don't carry much cash here. Don't move. Do it!
I think the Third World War is not going to be started by Trump. It's going to be started by film critics. Because people argue and get very, very
But that's
mad.
the fun part. Like,
Yeah,
you say, I'm not working today. No, I love what I do, and I will engage with you, and we got to get back to the history of violence stuff. But yeah,
I love history of violence.
But like, that's what that's the thing that's the reason we do what we do, is because we love engaging, we love hearing your opinion, we love sharing ideas.
Yeah, I'd never walk away from.
You've never been in a point of view where someone's actually got angry with you?
Not in
yeah.
person. On Twitter is a whole different story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if it's this case for like I said, I review a film every couple of weeks, but I even made some sort of random comment that wasn't even negative about the Star Wars Rogue, and I had a series, and maybe that's a function of being a woman on Twitter in the Star Wars fanboy universe.
I would think
but
so, yeah.
it was ugly for a couple of days, and so I just started to say, so that's a whole other thing.
But I mean, for me, I feel like it's a rare situation. Like, I mean, it's when you have this polarizing situation. Like the last time I've been attacked on Twitter was because of my comments on Birth of a Nation, and that was all part of the controversy that movie was wrapped up around. Where somebody on Twitter was accusing me of not having seen the movie because it just premiered. I was like, yeah, but we saw it a while ago.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like I don't usually get. I mean, I usually feel that people who are attacking on Twitter have another agenda. Like, and it's usually wrapped up in some other controversy, or they're just Star Wars fans.
Also, there's the rules of the game. Whether you're talking with someone who sees movies and is engaged and understands that criticism is informed opinion, thoughtfully expressed. I don't talk about movies with my parents because. Oh, yeah. It's in the same way as I don't talk about books with, someone who I like Maeve Binchy, but, it's not the best book I've ever read. So, if you're not on even footing in that way.
Well, my parents don't want to talk to me about food. So
you're so lucky. You're so lucky. Every Friday I get a call.
Roger Ebert talked about the time of film criticism and celebrity interviews where you got to hang out a whole day, maybe a whole weekend. Someone like Lee Marvin. He always used the Lee Marvin story as an example because it was his last long-form interview. That no longer happens. Now...
I would go so far as to argue it only happened for Roger Ebert. I mean, that's the other thing. He had a position of access and a level of familiarity with the industry that was never offered to, 90% of the other journalists? I mean, even back in the 70s and 80s, it wasn't that... You weren't that intimate unless you were doing a Vanity Fair piece.
I was just going to say, what about a Vanity Fair piece? That would be...
But that's not
somebody like Schickel for Time might get that.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah, but for the most part, no.
Now GQ now
and
is
also,
doing that a bit more.
That's just to sort of clear in terms of historical significance of film critics. I mentioned People magazine is the first mainstream publication which started to use a numbered rating system. The first television program to do this or that was Ebert. Ebert is also a little bit to answer for in terms of the decline of the profession we're talking about here.
Oh, okay. And the funny thing about that story is that when we interviewed Ebert and we asked him, or someone else asked him, wasn't me, about inventing the thumbs up and thumbs down, he said, not me, the Romans. So, and also, wasn't Ebert, I mean...
I don't think the Romans had movie theaters.
No, they had live shows.
Different,
yeah. Same themes a lot of times.
The Olympics.
Yeah. So Ebert is someone, you see, he has a lot to answer to with the decline of film criticism. Some would argue that he was, with the exception of the people at the table, one of the last great film critics we've had internationally.
Some would, yes.
And that just doesn't ring true to you?
No.
Okay. What are your beefs then with Ebert then?
It's just uninteresting writing.
Okay.
Mostly. It's uninteresting writing. It's only very superficially engaged. He had a knack for speaking in a way which is admirable, speaking in a way that basically anybody could read and relate to. That was not backed up with insight.
Okay. Is this anybody else?
So if
have
you're gonna be, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
If you're gonna be the McDonald's of movie criticism, though,
Yeah.
that's what you want to be. That's
Right.
how you have to do it, and that's what he did.
Yeah. I rarely agreed with Ebert, and I rarely found his writing or even the stuff he said on television that interesting. But not to say that I didn't admire who he was and what he stood for, in the sense of like just being a trailblazer. But I mean, when it was Siskel and Ebert, I mean, I actually did watch that show. It was always Siskel that I liked to hear.
Okay, and you two are suspiciously quiet on this.
Well, just when you said that, Jeff, I'm thinking that what I'm seeing right now happening, and that worries me a little in criticism, is that film criticism has become, again, I say mainstream, but just the sort of a certain length in a certain context has become cultural criticism. So every film is held up to, what does this tell us about how we live now in the world? And that's interesting for having those insights. But I feel like we're getting away from, as you say, the aesthetics of film and sort of the deeper, the filmmaking craft. And that's happening. I was a fashion critic for a long time, and that's the same thing is happening in that industry, and it's arguably television too, where these become cultural essays. They aren't about television necessarily.
We go back to Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, like the Caligari to Hitler
Yeah.
essay, and I mean that's been a part of film criticism since what was that, 40s?
Yeah.
Krakow?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. But if that's all that's happening, then you're losing
Right,
the
exactly.
larger- the more
sure.
precise focus.
Yeah.
I don't know. I always enjoyed reading Ebert. I don't necessarily think I had to agree with him. I liked the idea that he could present the ideas that he was articulating, and very basic ideas. And he. You know what it was? I actually found him more palatable than Cale, because Cale, the two major critics that when I was growing up that I read constantly, Cale was much more petty, much more specific. She hated what she hated, she liked what she liked, and there was no middle ground. Cale never revisited films because she didn't want to have to grapple with her opinion changing, which I find awful. And Ebert made a point of being fallible and open, and if he wasn't, he wasn't the best writer, but he was a really compelling essayist. And I do think that certainly as he got older, he was much more interesting when he wasn't just writing about film, when he was doing the other stuff, everything else.
There's the critic who wants to find something interesting in that moment and whatever in that experience in that day. It might have been a film that spoke to something in the air or something personally on that day. And then there's the critic who wants to be right, who just wants to be right.
Oh, John Simon.
So.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Rex Reed,
Rex Reed
Some
does
guys
that.
are great at that, right?
Right.
Well, I'll tell you. I think the thing that I always want most from film criticism is what it meant to me in my high school years. And I'll tell you, my first film education is this guy right here, across the table. I used to subscribe to the Toronto Star, and I read Jeff Revere, Peter Howell's reviews religiously. That's what got me into looking up these other movies that they were talking about, like when they would compare this current movie to this trend or this genre. That was what made me go down the rabbit hole and learn about film. And so in a way, and explained ideas to me, like I remember Jeff's review of Eyes Wide Shut. I did not grapple with that movie as an 18-year-old. I didn't understand.
You're still thinking about it.
Yeah,
let's be
exactly.
honest.
No, but
Right,
that's the thing. It's like it was something. It was like then going back to those reviews. It was like an education for me.
Yep.
So that was my first film school, and so I kind of always hope for film reviews to be a film school for people who do not know about what came before.
Brad, I think that's a great point, because I think I look, and I wondered if you look at the critics that came before you, and I'm thinking John Smith, I'm thinking of Pauline Kael, Graham Greene, all these great writers. I mean, I got into film because I read and reviewed Stanley Kubrick's Paths of Glory. Talk about spoilers. They talked about the scene where the one guy walked down the walk and he's going, why me? Why not him? Why me? And I said, I got to see this. And it was because of that review. And then all of Kubrick I had to see, and then all of John Ford, and then all of these, and then starting reading these essays and books and these critics. How influential has past critics been on your career or your way of approaching your career? You shrugged a bit.
Well,
went back a bit.
I don't know. I'm not from a big city, so I grew up in mining towns, and so there would be a Globe and Mail that might arrive by 3 o'clock. The Saturday Globe might get flown in and arrive at the corner store. If you got there around 3, you might get it, and my parents would get that, or my parents subscribed to Maclean's. But I spent a lot of time at the library just reading like Bosley Crowther on microfiche.
I want to bring
and
him
stuff.
up. Yeah.
And but that was not, really, and this happens, and it was such for me, a personal loss when he died, because I was thinking, my career started when I would have liked to have met Elwy Yost, because I had TVO in high school, and that was pretty much what I watched. I didn't read film stuff. I watched the movies, and he was totally a fanboy with this incredible access. Sure. He did have access, because no one wanted to talk to Ginger Rogers in her 70s in Los Angeles. But more recently, it was Maclean's and the Globe. But beyond that, we didn't have access to stuff the way maybe in Toronto or Montreal or something.
But you knew who Bosley Crowther was.
I did, because I was the nerd girl at the library, the Timmins Public Library. Yeah. So.
But we're all movie nerds. That's how it starts, right? I certainly gorged. I read whatever I could, because I came up before the internet and before there was access. Microfiche was still very much a thing for me at junior high and high school. And if you're going to be reading about old movies, that's how you do it. So as soon as you discover there's a world beyond the TV guide and beyond the newspapers, there's older stuff available to you, movies you've never heard of or movies you've maybe heard of but you've never read about, you start diving. Like James Agee was a big one for me.
That's who I forgot to mention.
I found a couple of paperbacks just a few years ago in a book sale somewhere, a couple of his little tiny paperback collections. And said, mine. I've never held them. I've read them on screens, but I'd never actually been able to page through them. And it's not a huge life-changing moment when you suddenly find out there are other people writing about this, but then you realize which ones you like and which ones you enjoy and whose prose style stands out and who has a better take on things, and then you're drawn down that rabbit hole. And that's the moment that changes you, because you just keep digging. And you come out the other side and you suddenly have to articulate your own opinions, and you can't just quote people, and what do you do, and how do you figure that out? And then you find yourself, you're in film school, and you have to do it on a constant basis, and what the hell am I doing? And then you end up writing for a living. And it's a continuum. Like, there's no start point, really, and there's no end point either. That's why we do this. And it's certainly not for the money.
No. And there's the video stores, too. That great heyday of the video stores, which I
wonder
if...
I worked in a couple.
Yeah,
that was my film school, really, even more so than actually going to a film school.
You should have seen our interview prior to this. We talked to professors, each from a different film school. Talk about going down a rabbit hole. I feel like we just got started and we have to wrap up, which is too bad, because I did want to ask about Bosley Crowther and why he lost his job over his review of Bonnie and Clyde. And I thought that was one of the great moments of disappointment, I think.
Yes. Yeah. And the equivalent today would be losing a job over not liking Rogue, whatever.
Rogue One, yeah.
That would be how you'd be shown the door.
Yeah.
Not sticking up for an art movie.
Exactly. And I did saw Bonnie and Clyde 2 weeks ago, and I disagree with Crowther. I think it's an amazing film.
Oh, it's an astounding film.
It's an astounding film, and he was thought to be out of touch and stuff like that. So we have to save for another time. I do want to know if you have a favorite Canadian film.
You start with me?
Should I?
Yes. Right. That's it. He wants to know if you have a Canadian film. Then we're done. Go ahead.
I can't really say what is my favorite Canadian film, but you know what? Like, I'm just gonna stick with the first Canadian film I fell in love with, which was The Sweet Hereafter. Again, I was only probably 15 years old when it came out, so I remember the Toronto Star review was 5 stars. I went and watched it, and I was totally captivated by it. So that was the movie that kind of introduced me to Canadian film and made me realize, oh, they make movies here.
Yeah.
So.
I'm still sort of having a Gary Burns moment, so I can go back and watch them again, and they sort of distill a time in Canadian film for me too. I would say The Suburbanators or Way Downtown.
Way Downtown, yeah.
I really like that film.
That's a great film. Yeah. I'm going to watch that tonight.
It's good. Holds up. I just saw it a couple of years ago. Yeah. I'm going to be nerdy and obscurist and pick Jean-Claude Lauzon's Loyola, which is one of the best films this country has ever produced. It's virtually unknown now because Lauzon died, 96?
Yeah,
not long after making it. And it's still out there. It's banging around on DVD if you can find it. I think it's on iTunes. About a year ago, I was looking into the possibility of screening a restoration, and it was underway. So hopefully the version that's out digitally is the restored version, but I can't be sure. I do know it still survives and is well worth anybody's time.
I agree. I remember seeing that the first time. I was astounded by it.
Impossible question. I don't have an answer, but I'm going to provide you with one. At the moment, I would say probably, I've gone back to it many, many times, one of the most exquisitely perfect films of any kind ever made was Made in Canada. It's a half-an-hour documentary, a portrait of Paul Anka, made in 1962. It's called Lonely Boy, and it's everything you want a documentary in that period to be. Absolutely fantastic, and it still offers so many lessons in how to make a film in which everything you're saying is suggested by the images and not told to you,
Wow.
which is a lost art in documentary today.
Who directed it?
Roman Kreuter. Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking the time joining us today. I think that was a great conversation, very insightful. One round, should people get into film criticism if they're interested in it?
No.
Well, maybe with reservations.
Is there
Start a blog.
Yeah. Is there a camera on me? You will starve and die.
Yeah. It's, you know what? The best way to do it is if you have no choice. I always say, if you need to be doing this, you will anyway. And probably that's where some of the best criticism comes from, is people who just don't have the sense to look around them and go, this is impossible. Right? They're going to do it anyway.
We just warned them.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much. That's a perfect way to end this. Thank you for watching. And remember, keep making movies because it is the Canadian thing to do.